So to get a job, sometimes at that entry level position, you have to go where no one else wants to go. You have to go like to areas where they can't find reporters that want to go live there.
You were seeing something and you had to capture
it immediately.
George Floyd wasn't like a single case.
No, that's key to understand. If you look at any of them, like what's happening in Turkey or what's happening in Serbia now, there'll be one like thing that causes the mass protest, but then behind it is there was a slow build up.
The differences between Americans and Ukrainians as people.
Some of it's culture, some of it's accentuated because of the current context of the war, but where people are extremely practical, like in the sense of like, okay, we have to get something done. How are we going to do it? What are the best tools? What are the best people? You can help? Okay, come on, let's go.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Be Yourself podcast. Today my guest is Jared Goyette, who is a friend of Ukraine, is a journalist with rich experience dealing with politics, culture, crime reporting. Jared runs speaking clubs here in Kyiv, Ukraine, and recently he started a news show at UA TV where he speaks Portuguese. Jared, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Man, we've known each other for, I don't know, maybe a few months.
Mm-hmm.
We met at one of the English speaking clubs, and I just instantly realized that this guy loves what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you were speaking beautifully about your profession,
mm-hmm.
journalism. So my signature question, Be Yourself podcast, is how did you uncover or discover your passion? How did you find the profession that really fits your values and that you enjoy every single day? Tell us about journalism.
Well, I think my process of fully embracing journalism as my path was about giving myself permission to do it, because I had, I always loved, from my mother, I got a love of reading, a love of writing. It was always something that I was passionate about, and politics. But my parents didn't come from rich backgrounds. I mean, I grew up middle class, but their backgrounds were rougher.
Where were you born?
I was born outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And what I'm getting at, though, is that they would always encourage me to go like on a safe path financially. They're like, and my father had always worked for the government, so I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. So I thought I would go into like maybe work for an embassy, maybe work for a development bank, work in those kind of words. And I tried it. I was an intern in those kinds of offices in DC, and I found it was way too dry for me. Like I knew the work was important, but I didn't want to be stuck in an office all day. I wanted to be talking to we're dealing with political ideas, but I wanted to be talking to the people impacted. I didn't want to be just in an office, talking theory. Not that that's not important. I just felt like it wasn't me.
So reporting was something that was enticing you more.
Yeah, I was like, but I had to get over this idea that, you can't do that. That's not safe. That's not responsible. There was a speech I watched. It was by, he's a writer who I agree with on some things and not on others. But on that day, Christopher Hitchens is his name, and he was giving a speech, and he said something to the effect of like, if you dedicate yourself to this field, like writing in opposition, you will get back what you put in. And that was the idea. Those aren't his exact words. And I was already like on the edge of like wanting to jump in, but having the hesitancy. And when I heard that speech, those words like stuck with me. You know what? I'm going to try. I'm just going to put my blinders on, stop hesitating, and try to make it work. I was in my 20s. And I was near the end of my college.
Were you major?
Geography and urban studies.
Not related to journalism.
No, I mean anything can be related to journalism because you can do journalism about anything. Yeah. But no, I hadn't. I was doing that, a bit of Latin American studies, and I realized that I want to do journalism. In journalism, thankfully, you can work your way in. So I started reaching out to people, finding a gig where I could interview musicians, and started there, and eventually got an internship, and eventually got a job.
Quick one, guys. If you can help me to grow this channel by hitting the subscribe button, I would be really thankful. Thank you very much for supporting me and enjoy the show further. Okay, what was the first job?
Well, so I was in the position of not having studied journalism, but needing to get like that first job is difficult. Like you really need it to establish yourself as officially a journalist. And I had some articles that I'd written at that point. So to get a job, sometimes at that entry level position, you have to go where no one else wants to go.
Is that so?
Yeah. And that means in the middle of nowhere.
Could it be dangerous or not well received? You mean some type of subject that no one wants to cover, or what do you mean?
No, I mean physically. Like you have to go like to areas where they can't find reporters that want to go live there. So I went. I went to like a low paid job in the middle, like in deep rural South Carolina. And it's a beautiful area. I'm not trying to say that no one wants to live in South Carolina, but people generally don't want to take low paid jobs that far out of the cities. But it was a rich experience. I gained so much from being there. It was tough because they really make your work when you're a young journalist trying to prove yourself.
Okay. And what did that experience teach you that later helped you abundantly, maybe in life and in work?
Well, it was just a like we had to write something like up to 14 articles a week.
So you're writing, you were really having a lot of practice in writing. You were seeing something and you had to capture
it immediately. Like you couldn't before. I would have thinking carefully over every phrase, and like you had tough deadlines every day. You had to finish it. It was the art of finishing what you had to do every day because you had no choice, and that it could have created a muscle memory in me of like how to do this and how to structure it and how to get to the end product. Without overthinking.
I mean, this knowledge and maybe even this skill set of writing by the deadline, because as an artistic person myself, I know how difficult it is to do something by the deadline. Artistic people, they don't want to have deadlines.
Yeah.
But you knew that there is a deadline and you delivered every single time. And now does it help you in whatever project you take on now, that experience?
Yeah, it does because I was in this almost like a journalism sweatshop, like a journalism intense background environment where I produced a really high amount, and it's like I met all these deadlines. They were difficult, but I did it. I got used to it. So now when I get a deadline, I'm like I know I can do it. Like I don't have as much fear as I maybe did once upon a time.
Let's talk about Ukraine and how you first heard about. Okay, I don't want to first heard about Ukraine, but what was the first time when you took a notice about Ukraine and you realized that this country is something that I wanna cover?
It was a while ago. It was the first time I started to pay Ukraine came on my radar was Orange Revolution.
Yeah.
And that whole trajectory, the protest, the poisoning, the whole thing.
Yeah.
I was interested in protest, like in mass movements and how they work. And Ukraine was new to me. And I was like, I sort of started to follow the politics. And then when Euromaidan happened, Revolution of Dignity, I was working at a TV station and I convinced them that we should be covering it. It was a national TV station. It was an English language offset of a Spanish of Univision called Fusion. I convinced them that we should be covering it. There are other people also who have that opinion, but it became part of my job to help coordinate that coverage. And that meant that I was talking to people on the square that were part of those protests on a daily basis and followed it very closely. And the whole trajectory of that revolutionary moment really stuck with me.
I was participating in the Orange Revolution, and I can testify from my own experience that the feeling of being united with your fellow citizens over one mission is something incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say that I wish this experience for all of us, right? But that's definitely a worthy experience. You unite in the face of one enemy. And this is exactly what happened in February. Where were you when you covered Orange Revolution?
Well, Orange Revolution was just me like reading about it, and then when the Revolution of Dignity happens, I was in Miami, so I was completely remote. But that was my first like daily contact with Ukrainians. It was my job to interview, do a pre-interview, make sure their English was good enough to be on TV, and then if it was, I would send their story to the TV producer and help coordinate when they would go to a satellite truck that we were renting, where they would be interviewed on live TV.
Sweet. Let's segue a little bit, because it seems that the George Floyd incident happened before that, right? Or after that? I want to segue just caveat to talk about this moment in your life. Give us details.
Sure. So, Revolution of Dignity is 2014. So the George Floyd thing happens after, right after COVID, 2020. I moved to Minnesota from Florida to be closer to my daughter. Her mother and I separated a while ago, but we have a really good co-parenting relationship.
You can give some advice on this later.
Yes, it's one thing I'm proud of in my life. Like marriage, I wasn't great at. Divorce, I'm really great.
Divorce expert.
Yes, how to get divorced successfully. So, my daughter was like around like between the ages like 3 and 5. I realized it was really hard to do remote, so I go to Minnesota, and I eventually found myself in positions where I was covering a sequence of police shootings. Jamar Clark happened as I arrived there. I didn't really cover that, but there was Justine Damon, Philando Castile, and eventually leading up to George Floyd.
So George Floyd wasn't like a single case.
No, and that's key to understand. Like a lot of times when you have these mass protest movements, if you look at any of them, like what's happening in Turkey or what's happening in Serbia now, there'll be one like thing that causes the mass protest, but then behind it is there was a slow build up, and that was definitely the case with what happened with the murder of George Floyd.
You were covering it, and what happened?
So I was there pretty quickly. The next day, where protests were just starting to begin. I got in touch with the Washington Post, started sending them feeds. One thing I was proud of is that we managed to get some surveillance video from a nearby store that captured.
Which wasn't easy.
No, because the stores they're anxious, they're worried, they're like, should I do this? And our job, part of our job is to observe the police and the investigation, and we wanted to independently verify what we could as terms of what was happening, and getting that surveillance video I think was key in terms of the public's understanding of what happened during that murder. It wasn't the only piece of the puzzle, but we needed to have as many pieces as possible. So that was important. But as what I'm probably most known for is as the protest grew more intense, especially near the local police station, the 3rd precinct. I remember arriving and like seeing a situation where there were some people that were angry and they would throw stuff at the police, but then also the police were firing kind of sporadically in rubber bullets into the crowd. And a kid in front of me, he was 18 or 19, YouTuber with a camera, gets hit in the head. And he falls hard because he got hit here, which is a weak part of the skull. And it looked like he was seriously injured. And I thought, okay, this is my job. Like, I have to document this. I have to, if people rush to help him, I am taking photos as much as in a dignified way, I'm trying to capture that scene because I don't know what's going to happen to this kid. As the volunteers picked him up and were taking him away, I got hit. I was lucky. I got hit right here with a.
Would have been your eye.
Yeah, a colleague. I need to check on because she hasn't been doing very well recently. A colleague, Linda Tirado, in the same area, not at the exact same time, but in the same area, did lose her eye. Because she got hit directly in the eye. I got lucky because it hit here and then bounced in. And like, you know, it's not like you see yourself getting hit. It's like, for me, like I'm standing and then the next moment I'm not and everything is black. I sort of like sort of slowly come to. It was a difficult moment. There's a whole story about it, but that is what led to, that of course leads to a whole legal case.
Experiences like that, they shape your standpoints on certain things, right? Or even they cement things that you thought about. And first of all, I'm glad that it didn't go any other way, and I think didn't end up, you know, something more hurtful. But that's for us Ukrainians. We're still trying to understand the whole dynamics with racial discrimination, race dynamics in the U.S. Right, and it's really uneasy. And I think it's a great learning point for all of us to understand that America does have huge challenges in this respect, right? And hopefully, sooner rather than later, peace will be achieved, and I don't know, in some shape or form, and incidents like that will not happen among. I'm not sure if peace is the right word, but you know what I'm saying.
No, peace is not is a good word to use. You know, I think you want peace and security, both, you know, in those neighborhoods, in the cities, all our communities, both in a place where people don't have to be afraid of either violence from criminals or violence from police, or I would say violence like from each other or from police, because anyone, you know, I hesitate to use the word criminal there, but that's something to aspire to. Although it seems like you know, there's not the conversation around that has isn't happening right now, because the political situation has changed.
I understand. Okay, let's shift gears to when did you first come to Ukraine, and what kind of prompted this?
So when the full scale happens, I was like, you know, I was covering crime in Minnesota. You can't really write about Ukraine a lot when that's your job. I was covering local news, but the Euromaidan had left the mark on me. I remember it being like, oh, I haven't been doing anything in regards to Ukraine. I felt kind of bad about that. And then the full scale starts. And I was trying to find a way to engage. I did write some articles that were local to Minnesota. There's a really cool organization called Portrayed, which founded by a Ukrainian surgeon that helps give prosthetics to Ukrainian soldiers in Minnesota. Okay. So I wrote about that, but I wanted to do more. And I eventually I was also, because of what had happened to me while I was a journalist, was very interested in journalism solidarity, trying to support journalists. And just looking around, I found this project called Words and Bullets, Slova y Koli. And it was interviews with journalists who either became volunteers or soldiers, journalists, writers, poets. And I really identified with them because they weren't like tough macho man. They were like office workers like me, and like their lives got completely turned around. And you know, they wrote in a funny way, or they spoke with referencing history and culture and things that I related to. And these were beautifully done interviews. There's a book about it now in Ukrainian, which I would recommend, Words and Bullets. But in the English translations, the first ones, I could see little mistakes. Okay. So all that happened is I was like, hey, these are beautiful. These are so well done. I think it's important that people read this. Can I help? And they said yes. Chitomo was the publication. And that just starts a process. You go, they send me some work, they like what I do, they send more. And then over the course of a year, I ended up having like 2 jobs, like my real job, which was in the local news, and then my volunteer Ukraine job, which was editing translations. And eventually they got a grant and could offer me more of a position. And so I left my regular job and was like, you know what, because every time I would edit, I would discover more about Ukrainian culture or history or literature, and it was fascinating for me.
Yeah.
It was like a whole new topic, a whole new world and I love that feeling. I love that feeling of knowing nothing about something and like getting the chance to sort of dive in. And of course, it's under these dire circumstances, but that also made like the essays that I was reading that much more important. So when the opportunity came, I took it.
Well, you said something that I really, really admire in people. When you are at the place where you admire and you're fascinated by something that you do, and you want to just find out more about it, I mean, that speaks to me a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm like that too. That's why partly I'm doing interviews, because I want to know about the experiences and life path of other people. Mm-hmm. And we were talking beforehand, before we started recording. I asked you if you can say that journalism is one of the loves of your life, and mm-hmm. you said totally. I also asked if Jared would do what he's doing for free. He said, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have at times. Yeah. It's part of who I am.
Identity.
And when I say it's basically telling stories, like holding conversations and trying to communicate those stories to other people is like at the core of who I am and the way I go about life.
After Chitomo, you got involved in a few interesting initiatives. Mm-hmm. So I know that you run Speaking Club. You help Ukrainians learn English. You also host a Q&A sessions with different speakers. Mm-hmm. And you had, in cooperation with Green Forest, you had Ron Gallo recently, mm-hmm. the author of the song "If Only Zelensky Had a Nice Suit."
Yeah.
And you also had an engineer from or a project manager from Apple. Mm-hmm. So you're doing some amazing stuff. Tell us more about this initiative, and maybe then we can shift to talking about the Ukrainian.
Okay. Well, when I came with Chitomo as a small media outlet, I knew that if I was coming with them, I probably should have another job too. And hosting English clubs was part of that. I'd never done it before, but I found I really liked it. I really liked it because it's very related to journalism. You have these people that come and you want to talk, and you have to get them talking. Yeah. So you have to ask, I'm curious about what their lives are like, and I have to find a way to host this conversation. I got a lot out of it. And I could also see that it meant a lot to them, because the Ukrainians that are in these groups, English is for them a way of like seeing a better future for themselves.
That's nicely put.
And like that's a tool. Mm-hmm. And so, and there's been times in Ukraine where things have seemed pretty bleak, or where it's been harder for people to see a future for themselves. And coming to these groups was like a way of restoring that faith in a future. And I was glad to, be a part of that. And then when the Q&A sessions, because, okay, I like doing this. What can I do to make it funner? What can I do to, and I was like, well, like a lot of them work in tech. Okay. I know someone who knows someone who from Apple who can, well, actually, to connect it, my ex-wife works at Apple. And like I said, we have a great co-parenting relationship. And I'm like, hey, do you know anyone who would do this? Yeah. And she's like, yes. And so she introduced me to Evan, and he that was really, because then it's like he can talk about his life experience. He can talk about how what happened to George Floyd shaped his perspective in terms of the activism that he does. He can also talk about what it's like to work at Apple. And I think that was really valuable for the people that came. And also, as far as language, I want people to forget they're speaking English, because they're so interested in what is in front of them. I want them to forget the fact that it's English.
Yeah.
And that's one way of doing that.
Yeah, I always laugh about the fact that it seems like I know things that in English, like I have different knowledge from what I know in my mother tongue.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, our brain works in this realm. Okay, so tell us about the Ukrainian media and how you were cooperating with Ukrainian media, and what are the challenges that you see for Ukrainian media as it pertains to highlighting events for the global stage?
Yeah. Well, I went from Chitomo, which is the literature focus, to working for the Ukrainians media, in which they have a magazine called Reporters, which is like literary journalism. It's beautifully told stories. It's like an honor for me to be able to help with those translations or edit those translations. So as I've been working in these areas, I think it's a challenge is always thinking of understanding like where your audience is coming from. And a story that's told for a Ukrainian audience is going to assume that people already know a certain set of things.
Oh, yeah.
For you,
context.
Yeah, the context is like a Ukrainian doesn't need to have the context explained to them, whereas like someone in the U.S. oftentimes does. So you have to think really carefully about what stories can be translated and what stories require additional information and context for the audience.
References that Americans understand historically, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I think you had this. We had the same thing in the U.S. Like you're telling a story for a Minnesota audience is different for telling a story for an international. Because I was lucky as a reporter that I had the experience of telling really local stories for people in a community, then telling stories for like a city, and then telling stories for national news, and then telling stories internationally. Like I went through all those different layers, and every time you have to think, okay, what does my audience know, and how can I lead them in? And it's the same dynamic that I encountered in the U.S. I encounter here in a different way.
You were talking about, you gave a great, guys, if you haven't checked Jared's interview to Media Maker, awesome stuff. You're talking about false perception, and that's what you're just pretty much reiterating, right? That perception is a bit different. I want to talk about another thing that I read from this interview, that you believe that Ukrainians are supremely open-minded to new things, right? Can you tell us about how are we different? Because this is something I believe made America number one country in the world, the innovation, the culture of innovation. America is a powerhouse, creating all this stuff that moved the needle, right? And if I could assume that you see the same mentality here in Ukrainians, that would be an amazing compliment.
I would say even more so now. I mean, what I have found is that some of it's culture, some of it's accentuated because of the current context of the war, but where people are extremely like practical, like in the sense of like, okay, we have to get something done. How are we going to do it? What are the best tools? What are the best people? You can help. Okay, come on, let's go. Wow. And there's no hesitation. There's no there's a focus on what has to get done and what are the best tools and what are the best people, and let's go. And yeah, I just find it to be very unpretentious, and I find it to be very sometimes it can be exciting, even though the context is difficult. That sense of community, that sense of drive, and that willingness to try to find new ways to solve problems is something that I feel every day here. And it's great. It's an environment I enjoy being in.
I love, because I come from entrepreneurial kind of world, and the fact about us is that we are not limited to Ukraine. It's something that I really, really admire about Ukrainians, is that we don't particularly want to do things locally. Like the global stage does not scare us, right? And but the language is really, really important here in being able to understand cultural differences, right? To do business and to do business with Americans. I'm doing business with Americans for like more than 15 years, and I'm still far from, being totally airtight when it comes to this delicate thing when you're just trying to negotiate, for example, right? So how about the differences between Americans and Ukrainians as people? What can you map out those?
I don't know if I'm qualified to do that.
What you've noticed so far?
I think while Ukrainians are very innovative and quick to move, there's like a certain code of respect where Americans can be very casual and sort of skip that.
Oh yeah.
Ukrainians like you have to go through like certain etiquette, and it can be different for each person, but that's that moment of being like, hi, how are you, like, checking in is important here. So etiquette, I would say, is strong here. I would say different contexts, not always, but sometimes things can be a little bit more hierarchical here. That can differ from place to place.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You find Ukrainians hospitable?
Oh yes. So it's a trick I use is if someone's really shy in a speaking club, like I can tell they want to talk but they're not, I will find a way to frame a question like I'm asking for help. Like, I need to know this about Ukraine. What could you recommend in terms of, I don't know, movies or something? And if like that person is reluctant to talk about themselves, if I frame it where like, can you help me, foreigner, they'll get over their fear and talk, because that desire to help the other is so strong that they'll get over the shyness. So it's a trick I use.
You think this is just something embedded in our DNA?
Well, it's definitely I would say it's much stronger in Ukrainians than it is in Americans.
Willingness and eagerness to help, right?
Yeah, to help the guest.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that all Americans are not hospitable, but I just think it's a core value here in a way that I have not encountered in other spaces.
Sasha asked me to ask you this question. Our videographer, Sasha, hi. He asked me, and I don't know if it's gonna fall under the political umbrella or not, but he asked me, how do you see the foreseeable future for our country, all things considered?
What I can say is that I believe in Ukraine.
Okay.
And that's not a comment about the government, not a comment about individual leader. It's a comment about the Ukrainian people. Like, I believe that this is a place that will not give up, that will try to do everything within its power to maintain its dignity, maintain its sovereignty, maintain its cohesion unity is a strong word because it's maintain its identity. I worry about the changing nature of my own country and its relationship to Ukraine. But I don't think Ukraine needs America as much as maybe we thought. There is a way through for Ukraine because there's been harder times than now.
Well, I hope the worst part is behind us. I hope.
Me too. I think there's reason to hope that. Yeah.
But the fact that you're with us.
Mm-hmm.
We're experiencing shelling almost every single night here, and Jared, as well as a lot of other journalists and a lot of foreigners, are here. So that's something that I want to tell you big thank you for on behalf of my entire nation. And
Ukraine has given me so much. Like I'm here. I get the chance to contribute to something, and I've been welcomed into that, and I try to find the best way that I can to contribute what I can. So I don't feel as if I understand that the thanks is sincere, but I'm like, hey, I just live here and I'm trying to do the best I can, like everyone else.
Cool. So I think that's great. If you want to some last word for our audience, hope our joint audience, because Jared has audience, I have audience. Some words of wisdom, or maybe.
Well, if in terms of like
what's going on in your life, I heard you had some new. You have a new job.
Well, actually, okay. I also have two thoughts, two close thoughts. The first one is what you're talking about. So, there was a period of my life where I lived in Brazil for a few years, and I learned Portuguese pretty well. And there's UATV, which is like a government-funded channel. It's a news channel. I would describe it as like I don't need to make comparisons, but it's a news channel with government funding trying to tell Ukraine's story. And there's a realization that Ukraine needs to do outreach towards Latin America. There's not a lot of Portuguese-speaking journalists wandering around Kyiv. And so I've been given the chance at least to have a few pilot episodes of a news show in Portuguese, which we're going to film our first episode on Wednesday. And like, I never imagined in my life as like a suburban kid growing up in Philadelphia that I would be hosting a news show in Portuguese in Kyiv, directed towards Brazil. I'm going to be interviewing Brazilians while in Kyiv. And to me, it's like, the way people have different ways of living their life and living their careers. But I end up in this spot, not because I had a plan. Mm-hmm. Like I follow one step and then try to take the next step based on what I see in front of me. Yeah. And I've lived my life like that. And some people can't. Some people, they need to have their 6-year plan. But living in this way has led me to this fantastically unique opportunity. And I think it's also because I'm here. Yeah. Because, like I said, Ukrainian work culture is very much of like, how can we solve this? Can you help? Great, let's go. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to work on this project.
Yeah, man, that's the philosophy that I'm actually implementing in my life. Mm-hmm. It also took me to a really good place in life where you take small steps. Mm-hmm. I know that, guys, setting goals are, sort of good for us, but sometimes, especially if you're a lazy person or, not this systematic, just thinking about this one step could be less worrying, it could be less tense. And you do the step, and then when you're there, you decide, you improvise on the fly. And if you have this connection between your brain and your heart, you're listening to your intuition, it will always take you somewhere. So I believe in this wholeheartedly, that there's a bigger plan. And for all of us, and you use the word calling, and I think it's a beautiful word that signifies that every single person can find something that they were gonna truly enjoy, and not feel like it's work.
And that's part of what inspires me about Ukraine. I mean, like, I think people talk about Ukrainian, understandably, focus on like the larger issue of Ukrainian resistance to Russian aggression. But what I also find inspiring is the individual stories of people, despite their circumstances, despite what they might have lost, despite the uncertainty of the future, finding their own callings here. Yeah. And that like, it's like all these individual stories, whether it's an entrepreneur or an artist or a student, that they are finding their path forward. They're finding their calling, and they're doing it despite the contexts. And those are the kind of conversations you can have here. And it's part of the reason I love being here.
Great stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're looking for a quality video production provider? Look no further. My name is Sergey and I own Beverly Production. We are a video production agency from Ukraine. We help entrepreneurs to create credible online, offline podcasts and clips that drive interest, to promote your podcast. As a podcaster myself, I early realized that there are not that many podcasts that put an emphasis on quality and creativity, just making your videos look really, really cool. That's why we mix our videos up with different visual aids, sound effects, flashy transitions. We do dynamic switching and other cool creative things that just set apart your podcast from your competition. You can check our samples on the website, and we also help people to post the videos. So we take over YouTube management, and we can also run TikTok and LinkedIn for you. So if you're interested in something of this kind, don't hesitate to book a call with me. The contacts are available on the website. Thanks a lot.